Hello and welcome to another episode of YGAMES. My name is MX Dash, and today we're going to talk about role-playing games, or RPGs. So, a couple of months ago I lent a copy of Final Fantasy VII to a friend of mine because she had never actually finished the game before, and to be honest, I'm not really going to miss it too much, and I don't mind if she takes her sweet time with it. Oh no, don't get me wrong, I don't hate the game. In fact, if I owned it back in 1997, I most definitely would have finished it, no doubt in my mind. But the thing is, personally, I think that somewhat more recent RPGs are just a little bit more interesting and enjoyable, especially real-time RPGs like Tales of Symphonia and Jade Empire. Bear in mind, however, this isn't because I don't like turn-based combat. I love that mechanic, especially when it is done right, like what you see in game franchises like the Worms series. No, in reality, I'm not a huge fan of disembodied battle mechanics, meaning that your ability to play as one of the characters is taken away from you. You see, in games like Worms Armageddon, when it was your turn, you actually controlled your worm in every respect. In Final Fantasy, however, you don't actually control your character. You just give out orders, and how well they execute those orders is really up to them. A lot of Japanese role-playing games love using this mechanic. As a result, this created a branch in genre called Japanese RPGs, or simply JRPGs. Now, I'm not saying anyone who likes this gameplay mechanic, which is a lot of people no doubt, don't know what a good game is. I'm just saying I, personally, am not keen on this. But you know, this got me thinking, why are these games categorized in the role-playing genre, when in reality, they have major game mechanics that are lacking the ability to role-play in the first place? Someone out there might say, well, Dash, that's because outside of the battle mechanics, you actually play as a fictional character in a fictional world. Hence the term role-playing. Oh, you mean like every other game out there? Let's be honest here, video games are interactive by nature, and a lot of games will most likely have a protagonist that you control. That in itself is role-playing. I'm playing as Mario, I'm playing as Master Chief. So how can an entire genre claim something that is also a common feature in other genres? Yeah, but Dash, RPGs also have item inventory and leveling up systems. Just what exactly does that have to do with role-playing? Those are all just mechanics that act as a means to an end. You need X amount of strength to beat an opponent with X amount of health. You need to find this item to solve that puzzle. You need to find this key to open that door. These are just obstacles that need to be overcome in order to progress in the game. There are plenty games out there that aren't categorized as RPGs that have these elements, such as leveling up, solving a puzzle, or finding a key. But Dash, you can communicate and interact with other characters. No, you can't. My character may be interacting with other people, but I barely have any control over what my character says. When a JRPG has a little cutscene between characters, there is no role-playing involved. It's just a cutscene. And cutscenes are, by nature, not interactive. Sure, there are some instances when the player can actually answer a question or perform an action that may bring the player to alternative events or branching paths, but these instances do not happen very often and can usually be inconsequential to the player. Western RPGs, on the other hand, does a better job as far as abundant and meaningful decisions are concerned. In these games, you can do more than control a character. You become the character. In other words, you are role-playing. You can make decisions, you can start a conversation, you can ask questions, you can influence the fate of other characters and even your own, through words and actions. So from this argument, we can deduce that this is role-playing, but this isn't. Really, JRPGs shouldn't be called Japanese role-playing games, but instead, turn-based adventure would be a better description for this genre. And it's not just that this term doesn't make any sense when it comes to categorizing certain games, but even when it comes to categorizing certain game features. Does anyone remember Castlevania Symphony of the Night? Technically, it is a side-scrolling explorative action platformer, aka Metroidvania. Go look it up. But one of its more unique features also included so-called RPG elements. In other words, its inclusion of inventory and leveling up mechanics. So the game has role-playing elements that, ironically, have nothing to do with role-playing, but instead is just a name that describes major features in the game's combat system. So why? Why are these mechanics and entire genres referred to as RPGs, which doesn't make any sense whatsoever? Thankfully, there is an explanation. For those that don't know, the phrase role-playing games has been around long before RPG video games were even a thing. It's safe to say that the modern definition of RPG has been around since the tabletop game Dungeons and Dragons. You see, back in the day, players always represented themselves. When you play chess, it was you versus the other player. You did not take on the role of the bishop, queen, or knight, but instead they were just tools that you controlled on the board. In Monopoly, you weren't playing as a shoe, iron, or car. They were just pieces that represented your position on the board, and that was literally it. But then along comes Dungeons and Dragons, a game that not only has pieces that aren't just an indicator of your current position or just a bunch of pawns at your disposal, but actual avatars that you take on the role of. Each character was unique, had unique stats, unique traits, talents, strengths, and weaknesses. Players adopted the characteristics of their avatars, and in many ways put themselves in the shoes of those characters, hence the phrase role-playing. In addition to that, Dungeons and Dragons would introduce rules that would be referred to as RPG elements, such as spells, magic items, and leveling up mechanics. So that's where these things came from. When these elements were adopted into video games, many decided to just call the genre RPG or JRPG just because of its similarities to games like Dungeons and Dragons. But in actuality, the name doesn't make a whole lot of sense outside of the context of the tabletop experience, because once again, it is a standard feature for players to take on the role of the main character in video games, which in contrast is something that was rare in tabletop games. That's why it was an appropriate definition in that situation. If you think about it, using the word rewind doesn't actually make any sense when you reverse the playback of a DVD, Blu-ray, or various non-physical media. The word rewind is from the cassette days, and it definitely made sense back then. You actually did literally rewind an actual roll of tape. But things are different now, thus making this term obsolete. Likewise, this is why RPGs that don't do more role-playing than other genres in the gaming industry really should be called something else. In the end, it would make more sense to deduce that the only games that should continue to be called RPGs would be the ones that go beyond simply controlling the character's body actions, but rather should also include character building mechanics that the player actually has control over, such as speech, personality, choices, role-playing.